Oh shit, here we go again.
We kick off things with the classic Lionsgate intro. Copyright strike inbound, get your views while they're hot. Welcome to New Zealand, land of the sheep, and also post-Return to the King cinematic era, where quite literally the next movie they made was about killer sheep. Some would say it was actually a step up in terms of cinematic masterpieces. A man in a wool sweater is actually rounding up a flock with some younglings and a dog that's somehow emotionally outmatched by a sheep. From a distance, Mr. Edge watches ominously as then he limps away. And then we get the title card, Black Sheep, or in reality, I don't know, this is like some Resident Sheeple sort of deal. Mr. Edge then sneaks up on a sheep with an axe and apparently offs it. Another youngling then shows up on a four-wheeler to find Dudley has been brutally unalived by a complete weirdo wearing him. Literally wearing his skin, blood and all. Angus, you doing all right there, man? Got some demons, perhaps? A lady then appears to tell them, hey, your dad just died, which honestly kind of feels like a side note to the skin wearing. 15 years later, our main man, Henry, is sheep traumatized and trapped in a taxi surrounded by all the sheep. He calls his therapist, completely melting down over the experience, while the chillest taxi driver on earth just sort of waits it out, probably because he's being paid. Eventually, though, they pass a meet his murder car, cue the hippies hopping fences like it's their day job. Actually, they could use one of those. Once you work a day job, you tend to kind of view life a little differently. Meanwhile, a small plane lands and out pops Angus. Yes, the Angus from earlier who wore a sheepskin. While Henry then rolls up after his taxi ride, he tells the driver to just sit there and wait, and he already owes him like $431.70, I guess U-bucks perhaps, which I guess is Kiwi for the meter is actually gonna still be running. It is only in this late hour that I have no idea what New Zealand money is actually called. Inside the house, I'm beginning to think this really is Resident Evil Sheep Farm Edition. Mrs. Mac greets him with a shotgun in the back, which again, luckily for him, it is just a shotgun. And at the pre-launch meeting later on, Angus and a few other workers are prepping for some vague, sciencey farming thing. It's a bit obscure as to what they're actually doing, but trust me, when we do figure out what they're doing, it is just as horrible as you might imagine. Henry then walks up from the woods, which nobody saw him apparently, as his therapist allegedly said this would be a good idea for him to return home. Angus is at first surprised to see him, as then they go back to the house to divvy up their inheritance that their father left them in the will. Angus then bleats at him, scaring the holy hell out of him. Also, is that a Toyota pickup? Actually, it's not. It's a Hilux. You can tell from the B-pillar behind the door. I believe this to be a N60 or within the N60 generation. These range from 1997 to 2005, and this is fairly unique because even though it's not too large of a truck, it has space for actually a dual battery setup that could actually help you run it better, I guess, out in the middle of nowhere longer by giving you more juice to start the truck. Like let's say, it's cold, you could start it. You can also switch it over to a solid axle fairly easily, giving you an even better off-road capability despite it already literally being god tier. The smallest of the engine sizes were actually a 2-liter IRZ-E with a 2.4-liter next, which is standard in some Tacomas around this era, up to a 2.7-liter, which are all, by the way, 4 cylinders, with the largest being the untouchable, absolutely unkillable demigod 3.4-liter V6, which actually I have in my 2000 Tacoma right now. While not winning any records for power and speed, this would actually give them a range of around 142 horsepower to 190 horsepower, which was great for these little trucks. The 2-liter was fairly standard in Australia, so I imagine this Hilux is actually that specific model, meaning it's a 2-liter. Man, I need to pick up one of these before Whistling Diesel destroys literally all of them. I get that that's his thing, but bro, okay, Toyota supremacy, baby, that's all I can say. Back to the hippies. One of them, Grant, then steals biohazard material from like that area with nobody recognizing him or even seeing him because, as he puts it, logic is for carnivores. Protein gang rise up. Scientists then chase him, but they have a massive problem, and that presents itself as they've never jogged before in their life or done any physical activity, so it's not gonna work. In the woods, Grant almost immediately drops the container, and in doing so, he releases something that seems dead at first, but actually isn't. Looking around, he gets attacked by a mutant lamb and has to go full on Ash Williams with a stick trying to get it off of himself, but unfortunately for him, Lamb 1, Grant 0. So we see there is some actual genetic tampering presented here. This creature was clearly being contained for a reason, but its attitude has shifted towards aggression. Genetically, these sheep have been tampered with to create a version of their own replication. This replication is stated to be the transference of actual cellular material, which seems to be hinting that the cells themselves can spread in the body. However, I believe it to be a little more in line with the genes that are causing an issue, which we will kind of discuss. And I think I actually have a way to explain this later when we see what is actually happening to make this a reality. And let me tell you, brother, someone needs to check on the Kiwis because why? Back at the farm, the brothers are splitting up that inheritance, and Angus, now a self-proclaimed agricultural scientist as he puts it, claims he's revolutionizing farming, which totally isn't ominous at all when he says this. Yes, Angus, do tell how you're revolutionizing it. Please speak into this microphone and with a therapist nearby along with a group of cops. Henry then gets some fancy shears out while Miss Mac butchers a rabbit on the table. Also, yes, you probably are interested, the meter is still running outside. Elsewhere, the infected lamb then joins a flock and starts spreading its bitey energy. Crystal Chick, which her name is actually Experience, but I am not going to be calling her that, gets picked up by Henry and Tucker. They find a sheep with a bloody nose from being bitten earlier, as Tucker says, well, let's see what it's made of, which is usually how every horror movie ever has started. Luckily, Tucker is locked and loaded Brides of Christ, which I have no idea how they run things in New Zealand. Like, is it common to have a handheld? Are the Kiwis staying strapped or getting clapped on the reg? At least by sheep, or are they clapping the sheep? That's what this movie is heavily alleged. Meanwhile, Grant is looking real rough post-bite after some time has passed. For some reason, the rabbit then goes close enough to him, I guess not seeing him as a problem, as then he grabs it and eats it raw. Looking real Gollum-like there, brother. As we can see, this infection is beginning to have several effects on Grant. First and foremost, it has changed his proclivities towards eating meat. He's now completely cool with it, which is a bit strange as that's not really the MO of sheep in the first place. But we can see the body plan concerning anatomy of a sheep is starting to take over. Physically, his eyes are changing to that of a sheep quite clearly as the pupil is beginning to turn rectangular and the iris itself has shifted in coloring to what is standardly found within sheep. But the question is, however, why is it changing currently whereas other areas aren't? Well, we'll get to that when we discuss the infection and how it actually progresses. Crystal Chick then re-enters the woods and calls out to him as he descends into carnivorous madness. This is the fate of all vegans, you see, whether they tell you or not. Also, quick question, bad time to bring it up. That meter's still running, right? Tucker then teaches Crystal Chick how to use a force multiplier as he tricks her into handing it over because she doesn't know how the safety works. Tucker is a literal alpha Chad. Then we cut to a guy making a meal, rip to him, as a sheep promptly tears them apart. Henry, Tucker, and Crystal Chick then find the carnage as Crystal evaluates the feng shui of the area, and it's completely off, which according to her is the most disturbing aspect. Hearing something, they then stumble across a snarling sheep that tries to Kool-Aid man its way through a door. Henry confesses he's got a sheep phobia, which has been relevant the entire time, as they finally shoot the sheep in the face, which at first does nothing. Second shot finally does the trick though. Outside, a whole flock's just kind of sheeping around, but no one can tell which one is infected. Now, good place to start is probably with the one that's trying to bite you. That one's likely infected. Crystal says Henry's chi is all off and he's apparently a tree now. Okay. As Tucker then honks from the truck, realizing that they don't have time to sit there and talk about the moon and the stars and the taproots. Taking off, oh god, the sheeps are coming from inside the truck. It immediately starts going after Tucker's throat as Henry then grabs a chainsaw, but once he starts it, he loses it instantly, total classic, as Tucker then gets bitten. Crawling around to the back of the truck, this leaves the sheep in the driver's seat. And because it's a sheep driving a truck, it then drives off the cliff. Seriously. Also, not sure, but when they had to film this, someone did have to launch that dog too. Crystal Chick then says it's a lovely view. Coincidentally, this is actually where Henry's dad fell off the cliff chasing a sheep. A nearby sheep then just farts, because of course it does, as Tucker then scares it off momentarily. The squad then plans to go warn Angus so Henry can finally piece out of this entire hellhole. Angus, meanwhile, then spots a taxi still racking up some U-bucks at over 1,000 at this point. That is currently, I believe, $590.67 in American dollars. So that $2 million check from earlier is actually $1.81 million. Put that bad boy in the S&P 500 in 30 years, you'll have yourself roughly $24 million. That's if you leave it alone. Or you can live off the dividends every month and rake in about $8,410, which gives you around $101,000 a year. So if you get a small loan of $1 million, you get like $50,000 a year. Invest heavily in Enron. Sell all stocks of Google. It's virtually worthless. The scientists then return, missing one guy, and then send another to dump the bio waste into that pit. Surprise though, there's two sheep there. He barks as if that's gonna work, gets chomped and then charged. The sheep giveth and the sheep taketh away. Grant emerges from the forest mid-transformation looking straight up ovine as he sees Angus's Range Rover, which you're in New Zealand. You could have had a Land Cruiser, the absolute buffoon. This is like the area to have Land Cruisers versus Range Rovers. Range Rovers are just the Jeeps of the UK. Complete crap. Angus then honks to get him out of the way as Grant then mumbles about Frankensheep, as for some reason, Angus then offers up his succulent hand as recompense while telling him to get off his land. Seeing this, Grant then bites Angus, infecting him. Meanwhile, the trio and their canine pal are being watched by the sheep. Tucker's foot is bleeding and turning into a hoof. Lovely. But finally, we can talk about some more science. I know, you've been absolutely jonesing for this. So as we can see, phenotypic traits begin to present themselves shortly after infection in the area that the bite has taken place, which shows what we are dealing with. Given that Grant was bitten in the face, specifically the ear first, his presentation of symptoms take place in that area first. Tucker was bitten on the foot, so as we could expect, the symptoms begin here first. When we look at his foot, we see the structure of it has begun to change, but it's still very much so kind of like a human-looking foot with sheep attributes. I mean, minus the hooves. The hooves have formed from altering the lacuna of the nails in the nail bed of the toes. Tucker's foot is showing that he's beginning to favor walking on hooves also, rather than walking on his feet in the standard plantigrade structuring. The hair follicles of the foot have also been altered to produce this wiry, woolly growth, as opposed to these standard fine hairs that we could expect from humans, which as always, again, we have just as many hair follicles as apes. Again, ours is just incredibly fine. Anyhow, so what does this seem to suggest? Somehow, the genetics of the goat have begun contaminating what I would have to imagine are the Hox genes. The Hox genes are the genes responsible for directing body structures and designate what sort of body structure will actually grow and where it will grow. Now, after your body is finished growing, which given they are all adults, they should pretty much be done with this whole process. The Hox genes will functionally switch off, and should they turn back on for any particular reason, this could actually result in the formation of new limbs on your old limbs, which is not something you want. Now, you might see kind of one of the benefits of turning them back on if you lose a limb. If we are somehow able to reactivate Hox genes in that area, it could be possible to regrow limbs. But that technology is probably, I'm gonna go ahead and say like 50 to 100 years out. But what we appear to have here is a gene contamination issue. The Hox genes of the sheep have transferred to the human via a bite. Once in the cell, they actually alter the cellular function and induce bone growth as well as hair growth. We will see that these Hox genes are not in complete control, however, and the human genome is still very much so at play here. But now the question becomes, how exactly are these genes implanted and how are they cured? Well, implanting of the genes is not likely the issue here. As far as I can tell, given how slow the spread of the bite is, or at least the symptoms caused by the bite, this appears to be taking really a hot minute. However, this could just be a bias I have with most movies I cover, because like, let's say you take a virus, for instance. In zombie viruses, it takes like seconds or minutes, but not hours. But in reality, with viruses, they're just not as quick as you might think. But we're gonna cover all of this here in a moment. The sheep then attack as the group flees to the lab. The quadruped then hops the fence while they lock themselves in. Tucker thought this was all just harmless biofarming, and maybe they were just playing with sperm in here. Maybe some weird sheep IVF. These are his words. So they find that one of the sheep is then hung up and is very much so undead, which tries to bite them again. Angus then shows up like it's agricultural science, bro, as a scientist then injects Tucker with something. Henry and Crystal Chick back out as Angus then fails to shoot them because he doesn't want to take out his own brother. Outside, sheep begin to swarm them. They shut the gate, but my God, the sheep are coming from inside the building. They find a mangled scientist and realize the sheep didn't attack Angus for some reason. Henry then rips up the check and says he has no deal, and then throws it at him as he falls into the gross, fleshy pit. Angus then yanks the Crystal Chicken after him because he's falling. Way to go, bro. As back in the lab, Angus dips his hand in a sheep container. Did he have to do that? I don't know. Meanwhile, the sheep retrieval crew is getting absolutely wrecked, and they've all been eaten, bummer, as Tucker's foot is diagnosed as spontaneous cellular transfer. When Angus shows up, she then jabs his wound with a Q-tip while covering Tucker up to not alert Angus, which, I mean, why? So let's talk about spontaneous cellular transfer. What is that? Well, it appears as though literal sheep cells are being transferred to whoever is bitten. But how is this even possible? Well, first things first, this is actually incredibly easy, but it seems like there may be a different process happening here. We typically call cells that are spreading to where they shouldn't be cancer, which, as we all know, cancer is a baby-back biological bin. Metastasizing is what cancer cells are known for, but as we may guess, this would take months, if not years, to present as an actual issue. So, are the sheep cells cancerous? It is highly unlikely, but instead, I believe something else may be taking place. Although they are growing, they would be using nutrition, so maybe they could be considered to be a form of cancer, but they're not putting so much pressure on the body that it's essentially killing anybody. But it is turning them into weresheep. So as the person is bitten, it seems to me what has actually happened is a form of like fertilization, you could call it somewhat. It's about to get a little out there, but as far as I can tell, this is not a virus. It's not a parasite or bacterial in nature. It really does appear to be a union of sheep and human cellular function. So here we go. Essentially, due to the knowledge that we will learn later, the sheep are attacking and they do have human DNA in them. Yes, for reasons that you think. Again, someone check on New Zealand. Because of how they gain this information through gene editing and a combination of the human genome, it appears as though the sheep cells can now functionally adhere to human cells that they come into contact with. In the human body, this is accomplished by cellular junctions, which actually hold the cells together like glue. Desmosomes, in particular, are of area of great importance, allowing for structural integrity to be maintained. The spontaneous cellular transfer would mean that they are in fact cells from the sheep entering the body, and then once this is accomplished, they adhere utilizing the same junctions that their own cells code for, making them compatible with human cells. However, for one reason or another, the cells of the sheep are now more invasive. You could almost think of them like sperm cells, essentially, which is referenced throughout the movie. It seems that once these cells enter the body, they forcibly attach to the human cells, where a form of genetic coding is disseminated into the other cell. Very likely, this genetic coding is going to be mRNA. mRNA on its own, or messenger ribonucleic acid, would not alter the actual genome of a human, so it does not enter the nuclear envelope, but instead it would be read by the human cell as protein structures to build from it. This to me seems like the most clear example of what's happening, given that the cure we will see later is able to fix pretty much everything. This is also supported by the fact that while phenotypic traits form, they can be reversed and the cells themselves will still maintain some human functions, given the genome they already have in the body is still functional. So nobody actually fully transforms into a sheep, but instead they remain a hybrid. This is further supported by the observation that it spreads rather slowly at first and gives the person a fair amount of time before displaying the full-blown symptoms that we will see later. Also, it should be noted that the immune system becomes involved, indicating the body is aware of a foreign pathogen in its midst, but it cannot be overcome. Down in the pit, Henry and Crystal squish their way through the viscera tunnels as sheep begin jumping down in after them. Henry then boosts her through the opening as he tells her to just relax, as she's just, why is everybody farting? Anyways, so getting out of the tunnel, the light is shining bright enough that they can see that the sheep is right behind him, as then he lights that up to seal it up. She now thinks his aura is actually not selfish, which, wow, what an improvement. And then back at the manor, Mrs. Mack is cooking when Angus stumbles in looking a little rough. He grumbles about his brother being a bastard, which can't be good, when talking to himself, indicating that he is in fact changing. Meanwhile, Henry and Crystal emerge from the cave as then they clean up, but as they do, they hear shears. Grant has gone full resident sheeple. Also, Meter's still running, by the way, getting squared up on. Henry then fights Grant with the shears and gets absolutely rocked at first, as Crystal Chick is able to confuse Grant by suggesting that he's been eating meat, which gives them enough time to barely trap him in the barn. Henry then connects the dot, which is bitten equals infected. Tucker's next up on the changing list, and back in the lab, he has begun transforming, saying his skin is itching and getting tighter. At the event, the taxi guy is still waiting, and he doesn't care because he's getting paid, as the sheep then pops out raptor style, and Tucker goes full lamb throttle. Tight-lipped science woman then injects him with the lamb juice, which apparently cures his sheepism. She then heads off to do the same to Angus because that's her employer. But why exactly is this able to happen? Well, the best I can figure is given that the sheep cells are attaching to human cells and then passing along mRNA in order to alter the behavior of the human cells, there must be specific markers of the sheep cell that are being targeted. And I can hear you now. Roanoke, how do you know all that? Well, the immune system is responding to a pathogen as it has detected. As a result, it is finding non-self markers on the cell surface, triggering it to respond with fever, sweating, macrophages, likely T cells, NKT cells, which naturally kill cancer cells. Basically, the whole body is freaking out. So this fluid likely targets those same cellular markers that are only present on the hybrid sheep cells and not on the human cells. By injecting it, those cells are likely forced to enter apoptosis as a result, thus causing them to completely melt within the body and stop influencing the human cells. At the event, Angus is mid-speech and clearly clearly mutating. Meanwhile, the sheep ambush the Matrix-looking lady in a mud pit as this just becomes complete Jurassic Park style, given all the plants in the background, which, man, the callbacks in this movie are crazy. I think it rips her head off from the sounds of it, as then in the shipping container, a very majestic sheep is released. It bleats as the whole countryside then bleats back. Suddenly, sheep storm the event like woolly zombies as everyone then is torn apart, including the poor taxi guy. At least the meter's finally been forgiven. Angus now flees, hand now fully hoofed as chaos then erupts. Mac then rescues Henry and Crystal Chick as Angus then crashes into a sheep and limps home with his other prized sheep. At the manor, Grant invades as Mrs. Mac throws down while Henry hits him with basically the haggis. Crystal then stabs him with the chopsticks, saying she either triggered paralysis or a coma because it's an acupuncture point. Gotta love the holistic combat. As night falls, sheep gather outside as they barricade the house, and Angus is also inside with them, pantsless, smoking like it's a standard Tuesday evening. Please, Australia, you are the closest. You need to go check on New Zealand. Henry then finds him and demands answers. Angus reveals he added human DNA to create the perfect sheep. And yes, allegedly in that way. And also, this is apparently their brother, which is how they were able to interact with human cells in the first place. But the sheep are now breaking in. Henry then hands Angus the handheld and walks away. As the walls begin to break down, entering the next room and shutting the door, everyone who was bitten is now back up, having been transformed into a sheep. Looking out and seeing this, that's horrifying. Angus begins leaving as Henry realizes he's been bitten by Grant. Well, this is pretty bad. Heading to the car, Mrs. Mac then gives him the pellet dispenser to stop Angus as Crystal Chick then kisses him. Putting on a wool cover, this is not necessary at all as he begins crawling through as one begins humping him, but in reality, he's already been bitten, so the sheep really just kind of leave him alone. He then stabs the sheep in the crotch with the golden shears as everyone then goes back to eating. His bite means, again, they really don't care. Driving through, Crystal Chick then starts doming weresheep as Angus gets to the plane. Going back and grabbing his prize sheep, he then starts transforming as his time limit has been reached. His teeth begin to fall out as anatomically he begins to change. As Henry then enters the barn, Angus begins his attack, having mostly converted into weresheep. Slamming Henry against the wood, he then stabs him with the golden shears as he starts going full-on sheep, with his maxilla expanding outwards and his hair production increasing. The plane at this point breaks free of its blocks as Shangus squares up with Henry. The dog from earlier then starts just kind of hurting Angeep, which does work. The plane then moves back around as it then turns into Shigas, shredding him in the process. Also, Henry's wound has begun sprouting hairs. So here's the breakdown of this process as I believe it. As the cells are attached, they're releasing mRNA into the next sheep, which contain the information coding for the Hox genes. This is immediately interpreted by the human cell as functionality begins to change. With this altered, bones will begin growing, driven by this new information. Now, would it happen so quickly? No. Bones take forever to grow and heal, especially heal takes about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the break. Like I guess said, try breaking a bone and you'll see what I mean. So, barring the time frame, the genome of the sheep itself is affecting the human gene expression via mRNA transfer between the two cells, given their close proximity to one another. It should also be noted that the sheep cells are continuing to divide inside of the body, adhering to more and more human cells as time goes on. And as this happens, it will actually kickstart the rapid growth once a tipping point is reached through the direction of the sheep cells, making them look sheep-like. However, long bones and structures appear to still stay relatively in their same orientation, giving us a bipedal weresheep. And there is a statement I thought I'd never say. However, Sheepus ain't down yet, as Tucker then shows up and hits him with the amniotic fluid, as this gives Henry some pause, which then he gets some as well, and that cures him. Also, why the mouth? It did end up curing Angus, but he's completely tore up from the plane. Tucker then takes off as they go to cure all the other sheep of their violent tendencies. Also, they're continuing to fart a lot, and for some reason, Angus is back up, and he just is like walking to the sheep barn saying, "Take me back," as then they immediately go straight for the crotch. Oh my God! So he's torn apart in the worst way, as then they keep farting, which with that much methane, Henry decides to just light them all up and start from scratch instead of saving them, so he just blows up the barn with all the sheep in it. Curing all the sheeple later, Crystal Chick then hands them an organic farming pamphlet as Grant is healed. Oh, thank God. Mrs. Mac then feeds them Rocky Mountain oysters, I believe it is, as Crystal Chick remarks that she does eat seafood, but this is sheep balls. Curing everyone, they still have sheep tendencies, and all's well that ends well, with the dog watching over the farm as then he bleats because he's been infected. Lastly, what's up with the lingering tendencies? Well, it appears once the sheep behavior works its way into the neuronal space, this may be a little more difficult to get rid of because of the actual neurological connections that have been made to behave this way. So even once the sheep cells are gone, the reality is the patterns of behavior may still persist after the fact, as you would have to undo those dendritic connections formed during sheephood. But now thus concludes Black Sheep. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. I'll drop all my links in the description, but I want to thank my patrons real quick. At the astronaut tier, we have Bananas Are Epic. Thank you, my man. Next up, our astrophysicist tier, we have Death Dancer. Thank you as well, Prometheus. And at the scientist tier, we have Dakota 23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, Ocean Gate was a cover-up for an anglerfish attack, Official Texan, and Stutz. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, you are greatly appreciated for your support. Absolute legends. Some may say goated. Possibly should. Okay, anyways. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see y'all in the next one.